This is the results of my first attempt at a garden this summer. These are the first fruits from that garden. And the Bible itself has a lot to say about first fruits. I'm Scott Hilgendorf with Cowboys of the Cross, and this is The Short Go.
So, first fruits were in the Old Testament rules that the Jews had to follow, were related to offerings that were given to God. They were the first of what was produced from the ground that He provided for them. And so the Jewish people were expected then to give God the first things that were produced so that they were making an offering to Him before they consumed any of what they had grown or produced. There was even a festival of first fruits. It was a lot of instruction then for them on how to honor God through recognizing what He gave them, what He provided for them, by giving first to Him before taking for themselves, as I just said. So we see that in the Old Testament, but we see a really cool and really interesting thing about first fruits in the New Testament. This is from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 through 23. But in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. By fallen asleep, we mean people who have died. For as by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. But each in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, then it is coming those who belong to Christ. So that's those of us that are saved. But what we see then here is that Jesus comes first. He's the first to have been resurrected. He is the first fruits of God's plan of salvation. That through Jesus dying on the cross for us, we also then could be given a place in heaven beside Jesus. So he comes first, then those of us who have a saving faith in him come afterwards. So he's the first fruits of this plan of salvation. And that being, again, the gospel as we understand it, that our sin separates us from God. And we see all of those rules, like the first fruit rules in the Old Testament. Those were all ways that the Jewish people had to work in order to stay redeemed and right before God. Jesus died for all of us so that Jewish and anyone else could also be saved without having to follow all of those particular rules. What happened then is Jesus was that sacrifice where they followed all these rules and traditions that required different sacrifices. Jesus was himself a final sacrifice on that cross, so that by believing that he did die on that cross for us and rose again was that first fruit, that he was the Son of God living here on earth before that happened. By believing those things and understanding that we need to be forgiven of our sin, that by believing those things, confessing our sin and asking to be saved, we can be saved by that sacrifice that Jesus made for us. So he becomes the first fruit, and then we follow as believers in him. Then we find our place in heaven when we die, when we fall asleep in this world. He's the first fruit, we come second. He's perfect, we are seen as perfect through him, but he needs to come first. Then we go through him to find our place in heaven. First fruits in the Old Testament were about tithes and offerings and giving to God, recognizing what he's done for us. First fruits in the New Testament is something else God has done for us. He's given us Jesus Christ to die for us so that we can be saved and have a place with him in heaven. Hope that makes a little bit of sense in terms of what it really means to look at first fruits from the Old Testament to the New Testament. We'll see you the next time.